Welcome back to the channel. I think a lot of X-Men fans, Marvel fans, just comic book fans in general are a little bit worn out by all the Johnny-come-latelys that come into the comic book industry, and you can just tell right away. One, they don't know how to write comic books. Two, they don't like the audience and they want to antagonize them. And three, they don't like the characters whatsoever. They don't take the medium, the universe, the title seriously. And whenever they come in there, it just becomes their own personal playground to make fun of the readers, make fun of the characters, and just write the worst stories possible. Is New Mutants 31 worse than New Mutants 30, which I think has gone down to legendary status? I think most of us saw that Perch video. He took that comic book down pretty hard. I don't think so, but it's pretty damn close, and you can see why New Mutants has been stealth canceled. I believe we won't see the title again or this iteration of New Mutants for quite some time after this guest starring appearance from Charlie Jane Anders and the story they're writing in New Mutants, starting with issue number 31 that I'm going to cover here today. Some of you may ask, who the fuck is Charlie Jane Anders? That's a very good question. If you're a comic book fan, you certainly don't know who Charlie Jane Anders is, but if you do a little bit of research, you can see why the writing in this comic book is so poor. Charlie Jane Anders is considered a superstar writer. That's what it says on the cover of New Mutants number 31. Introducing superstar writer Charlie Jane Anders. And when you look at their biography, certainly Charlie Jane Anders has a lot of awards and recognition for the writing work that they've done over the years. The big problem is you will discover that essentially every single thing Charlie Jane Anders has written has received an award. The very first story Charlie Jane Anders ever published received an award. The most recent story received an award. In fact, I believe Charlie Jane Anders has more awards than actual published works at this point. The only comic book writing credit they have is in a Marvel Voices Pride anthology book, where the introduction of Escapade, the star of this comic book series, happened. Charlie Jane Anders has never actually had to work to be a successful writer, especially if you consider success, critical accolades, and award recognition. Basically, Charlie Jane Anders just had to show up to work as a trans person, write a story, say, I'm a trans person, this is about my trans story, and you get awards, you get recognized. So you never actually have to become a competent storyteller, and that's very apparent in New Mutants 31. And there's no love for the medium. There's no love for the fans. There's no love for the characters in this. And that's the real big problem with that. Before I get into the details about how bad New Mutants 31 is, and it is absolutely terrible, I do want to give you just a glimmer of hope. There are a lot of options out there outside of the big two. If you want to support comic books, but you want Marvel and DC Comics to know you're no longer going to support their drivel. A few weeks ago, Alex Paul reached out to me and he said, hey, check out my graphic novel. I would like for you to talk about it here on your channel. It's going to be an Indiegogo campaign kicking off on October 26th. So it actually kicked off today. And I think a lot of you would be very interested in this comic book series. It's very retro in nature. It really goes back to what I consider the very best decade in the history of entertainment itself, the 80s, where it was all about masculinity, good storytelling, action-packed stories, none of this woke garbage, none of this stupid propaganda, virtue signaling within stories. If you're a fan of the 80s and old school action storytelling, I really think you're going to like this comic book. I do want to say this, if you are used to the big two artwork, this does have a distinct indie style when it comes to the visuals itself, but Alex Paul and his team are actually giving you a really good deal here on Indiegogo. There is a link in the video description. I hope you go and check out the campaign because there's a lot of really cool stuff here. Here's the Indiegogo campaign itself, Wild Void #1, if you want to go search it, if you don't want to use the link in the video description. There are some interesting things I want to point out before we get here. Alex Paul and his team are based in Europe, so there are different rates for shipping. If you're in Europe, if you're in the United States or the rest of the world. If you're in the US, it's $12 shipping. Europe, it's going to be 10 euros. Rest of the world, $19 shipping. He also mentions Indiegogo are adding automatic tip features on the checkout. So if you are going to support this and you don't want to tip the creator, make sure you remove that while you're checking out. If you're an early supporter of the campaign, there are a couple of perks that you probably want to know about. If you get in within the first 24, 48, 72 hours, something like that, you will get an exclusive trading card and a bust of the hero himself. I think his name is Gunner. He's actually a pretty cool character. I think a lot of people are going to like that. But that's with the sexy classic or badass bundles. And the badass bundle itself, you probably want to know about, even if you don't get in early on it. There's actually some really cool perks on that one. You get the classic book with the regular cover, but you also get another print of it with the retro wave cover as well as a retro cassette like mixtape. I guess this is the soundtrack of the comic book itself. If you're my age, you probably remember this. If you wanted to record a song or make a mixtape or maybe just a collection of all the stuff you wanted, You actually had to like record it off the radio onto tapes. It always sounded really bad, but it was a lot of fun. So that definitely goes back to old school 1980s culture. There's also a trading card as well as a poster that are included with that one. €57 for that bundle is actually a really good deal. There are a lot of perks provided in that one. Still $12 shipping if you're in the US, $10 euro if you're in Europe, and $19 to the rest of the world. I definitely want to say thank you very much for supporting the channel in this video, in particular to Alex Paul and the rest of the Wild Void team. If you have the opportunity, definitely go check out the campaign. I think this is a comic book a lot of you are going to enjoy, and I would appreciate it if you consider supporting the sponsors of the channel and specifically on this video as well. Now let's get into New Mutants number 31. Charlie Jane Andrews, Alberto Albuquerque, I believe, is the artist on this one. And we do need to give a special thank you to Sarah Brunstad, who is essentially the editor behind every single terrible comic book on the X-Men line at this point. If you're a bad writer, but you check a box when it comes to LGBT representation, Sarah Brunstad is going to call you and put you on one of the X-Men books, whether you like the characters or you're qualified for it or not. So thank you very much to Sarah Brunstad for continuing to hire incompetent comic book writers. Don't believe me? Check this out. First up, this is Escapade. Most of you probably don't know who this character is. She was introduced during Marvel Pride Voices 2022, and this character is supposed to be a villain. She's actually supposed to be a thief, and that's supposed to be like what makes the character compelling. She doesn't want to be a part of Krakoa. She wants to be a true villain, but then she's kind of coerced to the island. So you imagine this story that they're telling is going to be about the struggles of the character Escapade actually just fitting into Krakoa and trying not to be a villain all the time. But none of that actually happens. This character speaks in the most generic platitudes you've ever heard in your life, just like every other single character in this comic book. You can tell Charlie Jane Andrews has no idea who any of these characters are, including Escapade, the character that she actually created, and does nothing interesting with them whatsoever. Why did superstar writer Charlie Jane Andrews create Escapade in Marvel Voices Pride 2022? Quite simply because her power set is to be trans. She can literally transform into anyone or anything within 7 feet of her. So if you're the world's best juggler, if Escapade is within 7 feet of you, Escapade can be the world's best juggler. If you're a bartender on Krakoa, Escapade will become a bartender on Krakoa. If you're multiple man, Escapade will become multiple man. Basically, it's sync, but so much less interesting, it's not even funny. I guess the storyline that's supposed to be compelling about Escapade in here is their best friend. I believe his name is Morgan Red. I'm not sure if they're a couple or not. They might be. They've known each other since they were little kids. We get lots of flashbacks. They look like they're Peanut cartoons when they do that. Escapade has been shown a future from Emma Frost where using her powers kills Morgan Red. The problem is Morgan Red is also a mutant. In the Krakoan era, every mutant that dies is resurrected in one page. So there's literally no stakes or reason for this character to worry about their best friend dying because they used her powers. And it's actually brought up for about half a second by 2 of the other mutants on the island when she talks about it, and then completely ignored for the rest of the story. There are no stakes here because it doesn't matter if Morgan Red dies or not. Everyone is resurrected. Charlie Jane Andrews quite literally does not give a shit about the current age of X-Men, yet was hired by Sarah Brunstad anyway. And we get some really bad dialogue. I got some worse stuff later on, but here's a really good example of it. This is Morgan Red. Of course, Escapade's best friend is Asian, and he says, "It's some kind of portal and it's growing. I covet this technology with the fiendish intensity." Every other character in this comic book would have responded to that portal with the exact same line of dialogue. It's so boring. There's no personality to any of these characters. And then we do see the entrance of the U-Men, who we don't ever see in comic books anymore. Why they would waste them on this story, I'm not really sure. The U-Men aren't the most compelling villains in the world, but at least they're somewhat interesting, and it's something that longtime X-Men fans would get excited for, but no X-Men fans are reading New Mutants. It's completely obvious that Charlie Jane Andrews has never written a comic book, has no interest in comic books, and certainly has no interest in writing a good comic book. The U-Men threaten these young mutants, they put their hands on them, and they just skip to the next seed where they've already been captured. We don't even get to see the conflict. This is a writing technique that you see oftentimes in television because they don't want to spend all the money it would take to actually film the conflict. Normally you would need some CGI, maybe you need some special effects and stuff like that. So it's a way to keep production costs down. Charlie Jane Andrews doesn't realize comic books are a different medium. Let's just skip all the interesting stuff and throw these stupid characters in a cage so we can get more exposition and terrible dialogue again. Don't believe me on the bad dialogue? This is what the U-Men say. if you're a UMen fan, if you're an X-Men fan, does this sound right for the UMen? Here's what I don't get, Phil. All these young mutants look trans or queasy. Queer, whatever. Point is, they're all about challenging binaries, except when it comes to the mutant human binary. Then it's all stay in your lane. You're so right, Dave. Let me explain something, Dave. Soon that mutant human binary will be the only thing keeping you alive. Mutant law says we can't kill humans, but you will wish we could unless you let us go now. Big talk. Cling to your mutant privilege. You're all pathetic. You were scary when you had a leader, but now you're nothing. That made it through Sarah Brunstad, Jordan White, and the editorial team in the X-Men office. That is absolutely cringe-inducing, seizure-inducing fucking dialogue. It's so bad. And it's not the UMen, because Charlie Jane Anders doesn't give a fuck about the comic book characters or the universe. And they certainly don't take mutants in their power seriously. We see this reveal of what Morgan Red's mutant power is. It's very reminiscent of when Marvel Comics told us about Soft Serve, the mutant that poops ice cream. Here's Morgan Red. So I can turn up to 8 ounces of organic stuff into chocolate. That's great. I love chocolate. Your power will help save the world someday. My power is a joke. Your power will help you make friends wherever you go. Doesn't take the X-Men seriously. Doesn't take the characters that wield these powers seriously. And then you get crap like this. A mutant that can turn 8 ounces of organic matter into chocolate. Yet each and every month, Sarah Brunstad and Jordan White continuously hire terrible, terrible writers. Charlie Jane Anders is the death of New Mutants. We knew that coming in. The comic book has been stealth canceled. Vita Ayala killed it. Charlie Jane Anders is just doing a tap dance on the grave of the New Mutants. The comic book series needed to die. It was terrible. There hasn't been a good story in a very long time. But this isn't just a New Mutants problem. This is an X-Men problem. This is a line-wide issue for Marvel Comics right now. X-Men has basically become /fic, queer fanfic, because of Sarah Brunstad, Jordan White, and the rest of the idiots in the editorial staff for X-Men at Marvel Comics. If you wanted to learn more about this, Doc and I had a really good conversation. Definitely check it out here. If you don't see it here, there's a link in the video description.